Hi, this is Randal Schwartz, host of FLOSS Weekly. This week, Aaron Newcomb joins us. We're going to talk about testing. We're going to talk about testing using the Tapper framework. Does everything from soup to nuts. You're not going to want to miss this, so stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for FLOSS Weekly is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is FLOSS Weekly with Randal Schwartz and Aaron Newcomb. Episode 241, recorded February 6, 2013. Tapper. It's time for FLOSS Weekly, the show about free, libre, open source software. I am your host, Randal Schwartz, Merlin at Stonehenge.com, bringing you each week the movers, the shakers, the big projects, the small projects, projects you might not have heard of, like perhaps today's show, but maybe projects you use every day. You never know. So I try to bring them all together. What a great variety. I am joined every week by a lovely and talented co-host. This week, none other than Aaron Newcomb. Aaron, welcome back to the show.
Oh, I don't know. I'm talented. I'm not sure that I'm that lovely, though. But nice try. I appreciate it.
I've been making jokes about that like almost every time about lovely. I don't quite know why I go with that word, but somehow it just keeps slipping out. So I just figured I might as well just go for it full speed this time.
What are you, Pat Sajak or something now?
Apparently, yeah. Apparently,
and I'm
expecting y'all to be Vanna Whites. Apparently, for my co-host material here. You look like you're in the brick house, and I am in an unusual place this time. I walked over across the street to my client's location, and then they kicked me out. They said, "No, this conference room is going to be used all day," and so I came back to my my hotel room. So if it looks a little weird and behind me, and if my connection's bad, I'm actually using a 4G modem to be online today. So if I go narrow or have bad audio through the show, I apologize in advance because I have no control over that. I'm definitely not using the hotel Wi-Fi, which is even less bandwidth than my personal 4G modem. So I apologize for that in advance. However, we have a really interesting show set up today. For one, it looks like it's heavily Perl. And Perl. I am the Perl guy. I've spent half my life with Perl. I'm just over 51, and Perl came out 25 years ago. So basically, half my life I've been hacking Perl. And this is a testing framework called Tapper. And what Tapper does is it allows you, as best I can understand, to fire up VMs, load a bunch of software on it, run code that in Perl, but outputs the protocol. Test anything protocol, but it's like your PIN number. What are you going to say? It's just, or the ATM machine. Yeah, people say it. Okay, so tap protocol, which is basically a series of messages. OK1, OK2, OK3 is your test pass, and then that gets gathered in and goes into some sort of central reporting database and provides a web page where you can say this worked or it didn't, and here's some mail if it doesn't work, that sort of thing. So I've pretty much every client I've been at recently has some sort of environment like this where they can push stuff to it and have it test, like maybe under the control of Jenkins or something like that. But I'm really liking what these guys have done with Tapper. So we have, let me check the names here, see if I can get this pronounced right. Steffen Schwigon. Oh man, I have to ask him how that's pronounced that. And Maik, I hope. Maik Hentsche. Maybe Hentsche. There we go. Let's try that. They're going to bring those guys on in just a moment. Aaron, what do you know about testing, and what do you think of Tapper so far?
I know nothing. I don't know anything about it, so this is going to be interesting for me. Hopefully I'll be able to figure this out. I think I will. I mean, I'm around software development enough. I know you have to do QA work. You have to do testing before you ship your code, hopefully. But it'll be interesting. I don't know what benefits it actually brings to that whole realm. So this will be interesting. It's a project that I don't know much about, so I'm actually really looking forward to finding out more about it.
Well, you'll be a good proxy then for the people in the audience who don't know much about it. So that's really nice. I really like it when I go in somewhat naive to a project, because that way I get to ask all the appropriate questions for our audience.
Exactly.
I get to be the proxy. In this case, though, I know a lot about testing. I know a lot about Perl. So I probably will ask some of the more heavy questions. So let's go ahead and bring on our guests. Welcome, Steffen Schwigon. I'm sorry, how do you pronounce your last name? I'm sorry.
Schwigon.
Okay.
Steffen Schwigon, yeah.
Very good. And welcome to the show.
Welcome. Hi.
And where are you speaking to us from?
Yeah, I'm speaking from Dresden, from my home currently. Dresden is the East Germany, near, in the east, southeast.
Very cool, very cool. And also let's welcome on our other guests. We've got two guests today, Maik, Hentsche. Where are you speaking to us from?
Also Dresden, so the same town, the same country.
Okay, very good. Well, that's kind of easy to make that work. Nice. So, Steffen, I gave an overview of Tapper, which actually I found very familiar as I was trying to do the research for today's show. I went, oh my God, the test anything protocol. A little familiar with that. This is really going to be a really relevant show for me today. But I sort of gave the high-level view of it. But why don't you tell us what problem Tapper is solving and how it came into being?
Okay, so Tapper is an infrastructure. That's the most important difference to other systems that I'm aware of. So it starts basically in the center with a typical approach of testing, has your test suite and so on, and then it adds on the other sides logical layers to schedule these tests or to evaluate on the results. So basically, it takes this tab as the basis, and then adds all the missing bits that you need if you think large, if you really want to run a QA department with all the complete life cycle. So that's what Tapper is about.
Okay. So basically, it's a way of making sure that things run in the sense of like, I don't know, I guess one of the phrases would be like continuous integration or test-driven development, something like that.
Yes. So we have basically all these buzzwords also in it. We have this continuous integration and test-driven development, but we try to get everything under a common umbrella. So originally, when we started in AMD with Tapper, it was about testing operating systems and virtualization. And from the beginning, I also wanted to do what this typical unit testing stuff is that I already knew. And so it was always about getting all these different use cases with different structure under a common umbrella. So yes, there is common continuous integration, there is unit testing, there is basically anything in it. And it's about lowering the entry barrier so that developers that are not used to test, maybe because they work in strange development environment, like in operating systems, and they just boot their kernel or so, to make it possible to integrate them, to make it easy for them to participate, even if they don't care for the automation or what else. So, yeah. Basically, it's everything you probably heard already about testing. Okay,
so in the sense that, okay, if I'm a developer, I'm creating software. Am I then also creating tests to go alongside that, and Tapper is running those tests for me?
Yes, you can, but you don't need. So if I would start from scratch, then you have this project that you take care of, and either you already have tests or you decide to write them now. And for this, I always suggest to use a tab toolchain, like from the Perl world or from many other projects, and then you can run and execute your tests locally. And at some point, you want to do you basically add the automation layer on top of it. So that's the next step. You want to write maybe a wrapper which not only runs your tests, but also uploads files, log files, kernel config files, or whatever. And this is where Tapper comes in. So it gives you this APIs to embed your testing, which you are used to, into a bigger picture. So we don't care how you write your tests. The only thing we care about is that it is tab, which is kind of mainstream. And then you, we feel already we at all the missing bits. Yeah, like automation. Not sure if
If I may step in.
Sorry?
If I may step in, the most important
Please.
part is when you're now finished with writing your tests, you can upload your test results to Tupper, and Tupper will aggregate them and will show them in a web framework. And you can look how certain tests use cases developed over time. Also, you have the chance when you think of kernel testing, it's so important to set up a machine initially, and you can do this with Tupper. You just need to describe what machine you want to set up and what distribution you want on it. This is what Tupper does. Also, you got integration of a task juggler, which allows you to have project management attached to your testing infrastructure. So if you see this from a very high level, you can say, okay, I have a project that I want to work on, and it's only finished when all the tests associated with this sub-project are finished.
So can I, let me just ask a quick question. I want to break in. I want to make sure that we understand what we're talking about. So can we explain for people that aren't maybe in the software development world, what is TAP anyway? I mean, what is that? Why do I need that?
Okay, I can. So usually, if you write a test, you write it in any way you want. Basically, say you have a library and your test is essentially a small program that uses your library, includes it, imports it, and calls a function. And if the result of the function is okay, then you now want to declare this test result that it is okay. And for this, there is you need something that then later a test harness which executes all the tests can evaluate whether all the test runs. So you write hundreds of them, little function calls and comparisons of results, and this test harness runs the script and needs something to know what a test result was. And there, this about 25 years ago, a protocol was invented by, I think, Larry Wall, which is basically a line-based description of test results. So you have this little word OK, then maybe an optional number so that you can number the tests, and after that a description of what this test was. And if you have hundreds of these tests, you have all these little OK lines, and maybe also a not OK if the expected result was not the same as the actual result. So, and if you have this test protocol standardized, which it is in this case, the TAP protocol, then you can take a tool chain to evaluate, to start your tests, and it parses these lines, these OK lines. And there are basically two big major worlds for these. So one is this test anything protocol, and the other big one is the XUnit. Maybe some people know the JUnit project also, where people write unit tests. And the XUnit is more targeting living in this XML world with tool chains and so on. And TAP is really this simple protocol which you can generate on your own with simple print lines. So this fits to the world we lived in when we started this project for operating systems, because you don't want to have to depend on a heavy tool chain. You just maybe are in a kernel driver and just want some print K lines, and you are always able to print some OK and a description. And then the test harness just needs to collect these lines in any way, maybe just redirect the standard output or feed the log into the tool chain. So yeah, and then evaluate this. So a common tool for this is Proof. It's on most Linux distributions already. you just type proof and your test program, which emits tab to standard out, and then you see the result.
Yeah.
So this is basically what you are used to from unit testing world. You have this library, write the test, and execute it.
And TAP itself stands for Test Anything Protocol, correct?
Oh yeah, sorry. TAP stands for Test Anything Protocol. There's a homepage, it's testanything.org, or you can also look at Wikipedia. And yeah,
I'm looking at Wikipedia right now, and there's some really good examples there of. It kind of explains what it is and some examples of some parsers and things that you can look into for various languages. So I just want to make sure we're at a high enough level still. So essentially what's happening with this is it's analogous maybe to what happens if you do, hopefully, people that listen to this show are familiar with building their own libraries or compiling their own programs maybe. And when that happens, you see it'll try to build a certain library or something, or a test for does this library exist on the system? And it'll come back and it'll say, okay, right? So this is kind of analogous to that, right? What you're doing is you're basically taking your whatever software you're developing and you're putting it through this now standardized way of testing to make sure that you're not breaking anything. Like you said, you can upload files, you can interact with other systems, and each little thing you test for, it comes back and it says, yes, you can do that, or no, it failed, correct?
Correct. And the nice thing about TAP is that it's very easy to generate, so in a restricted environment. And it's the tool chains, or part of the standard, is that you ignore any lines that are not known. So you can basically output all the lines along the normal output of your program, which you don't always have under control. So sometimes your own program prints to standard out. So as long as it doesn't look like an OK line, it is an ignored line. And that's what makes it so easy to write a test and have it output the results.
Right. That's a lot different than a debugger, which is going to look at every line in your code, right?
Yeah.
Make sure everything works. But where this is just looking at, did this task complete successfully or not?
Yeah. So, and from this basis, from this starting point, we extend to a really big picture. So TAP provides some additional features, like you can declare a line that you expect it to fail. So you mark it with a pound sign and the word to do, and then some description why this is expected to fail or so, like a test-driven development. Or you can, and when you run it and it's not okay, but you have this to do, then it's in the complete run, it doesn't hurt, so it's still okay. And once you have the feature implemented, this little test will return an okay, and then you, in the summary, after you run it through proof, it will say, yeah, you have these many tests that were unexpected to succeed, but they succeeded actually. And you can also mark lines as skip. So if you are on a strange environment, you have written your environment for some functions only for Linux, and you run it on Windows, then you just mark them skip. And so in the output, you have them, the tests, and you just mark it with a pound sign skip and some description you run in Windows ignored. So, and then you can embed more structured data. So in TAP, it's possible to embed little YAML snippets. So YAML is this the thing before JSON. And you can basically, with this, embed, for instance, benchmark data. And so in the toolchain we provide now, we parse this tab not for this direct aggregation of results, but we generate the results into a complete, similar to a DOM, a document object model. So the whole tab results in a document. And there are all the results, the okay and not okay lines are in there, but also these benchmark values. And based on that, we store it in a database. So now we have a tab database. So this is the first part after this usual unit testing stuff. You send it to a server, you don't need a heavy toolchain. You can basically just pipe this tab with netcat into a socket, to a host and some port, and it slopes in everything until you close the socket again, and then it's part of your tab database. And on that, because it's all a structured document, you can then do any evaluation you want on this data. And yeah, we, for instance, provide a query language, which is a combination of some abstract definition of what test suite you are searching for. And inside these test suites, you can look into the structured result documents with an XPath-like syntax. We call it dpath, which is not only for tab, it's basically for any structured document. And you can then easily find your results, let's say by the description. You don't need to know it's the 17th test or the 50th test. So you just search for a description anywhere, or you search for a benchmark, for a particular benchmark. So we are solving basically there the problem of evaluating at all on the results, but also usually this test suite evolves over time. So you have 10 tests in the beginning, and a year later you have 500 tests, but still one of the first 10 tests you want, maybe now in the meantime they are at the end of your huge test script, and still you want to find them. And this query language makes it very easy to fuzzily find this test because of this dpath language.
Right, which is really important that's really what QA people do, right? They need to go through and figure that stuff out. So it makes it easier for them to go do that. This started out testing operating systems, is that right? Is that how this project started?
This is right.
The ideas basically started earlier. So we combined some experience that I did before on other QA tasks, which were more towards unit testing. And there I also already combined, let's say, a Prolog program, which I had no idea how to test it, and it was a Perl Prolog bridge, and I wanted it to be part of this typical unit testing in Perl. And when I came to the Operating System Research Center at AMD, I met Maik, and they had this automation layer. So we combined the experience from me of combining any tests into something with this automation part that they already started there. So that's how it started. So we started with operating systems, and especially with virtualization. So we didn't start with the kernel like other projects, like Autotest, but we started with virtualization testing, which is basically one more abstraction layer you need to take care of. You want there to, you have this typical additional structure of a host system and some guest systems and more complex timeouts, or you want to group things together that without knowing that, or without the parts knowing that they are part of a bigger picture. So the virtualized guests don't know the other guests on the same system, and so on. And that's where we provide, basically we collect meta information to reproduce or reconstruct the original big picture out of this little meta information.
So when you started this, or from what I can tell from your bio, you've basically been with this project since the beginning. So what had you choose the TAP protocol, though that's redundant, test anything protocol. What had you choose that? Or were you already heavily into Perl at that point? Or is it just that it happened to be something that you already saw a lot of other people using?
You mean why you choose?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, Mike, go ahead.
There are two reasons. First of all, we already were Perl programmers at this point, so TAP was already known to us. but also it served our needs very well. As Steffen already described, TAP has the advantage to be manually writable. You can output it with print K, print F, whatever you use in your standard tool chain, and generate it manually. So it's very simple to do simple tasks, but it's possible to do complex tasks like inputting or integrating YAML and therefore integrating any data you want. So in this case, also TAP served us very well. And we were happy to see that TAP was provided by many languages. And therefore, our testers, so the guys who wrote the actual test programs, were not bind to one specific language, but could write their tests in any language they wanted: C, Perl, Python, Ruby, Bash, or whatever.
Does this even extend to, I think there's some JavaScript libraries that speak TAP now? Are you able to test web applications all the way down to using like a JavaScript engine?
Yes. Last time I checked on Wikipedia, there were, I think, 2 or 3 JavaScript libraries, one especially for Node.js. I haven't looked into details, but yeah, basically, it's quite easy to emit TAP. So it's no surprise that there is a framework for basically any major language. So I think, if I counted correctly, we have 20 languages or so for the emitting, but you don't need it, but you have them with support.
Very cool. And so as I'm reading the description for this system, then basically you can define a series, you define an environment, and the environment gets spun up somehow, and then you can define a series of tests to be run, and then there's a web output framework and some sort of database behind that. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah. Maybe I just start and Maik continues. So if you now put the automation layer on top of this, so you have already the functional test and maybe the benchmark who creates the values. And for this automation, at AMD, we worked on a quite restricted environment, which is because it was testing on early silicon. So there wasn't... It's always basically one machine you have with this early CPU before it hits the market. And so the machine pool is really small, and that's why we set up the machines from scratch. So we always boot them from the network, install it, and then run something. And this scenario is described in, we call it preconditions. It's kind of a recipe. It's also little YAML snippets and some small building blocks like install an image, install a package, install a guest image, then in this guest image install some files or run some local scripts, and then boot the whole thing. And because we injected ourselves into the boot process, we then basically start the whole thing with tests in the DOM0, in the host operating system, and in the guest systems, and so on. So this is this installer thing. We can also install in with kickstart or autoyast, whatever is the current way to install. And basically just call back to the automation engine, which schedules then all these single installs so that you make good use of the whole machine pool you have. So maybe on the scheduler, Maik can explain more about it. So because this is quite a large-scale topic. So basically we run hundreds of thousands of tests on 30 machines about.
Wow.
Yeah. And all were different scenarios. So
which is
Maik, you want to describe that?
Yeah, which is quite important when you do Xen testing. Then issues usually come up with various exotic combinations of host system and guest system. So you have to test a big bandwidth, and therefore we defined use cases which automatically took different combinations and scheduled them onto the hosts. So there's a scheduler which gets a number of use cases. We call them queues. Each queue is for one such use case. For example, you have one use case or queue for Xen 4.1 and one for older Xens, one for kernel testing, and so on. Each queue has a bandwidth associated. So you can say, well, Xen 4.1 is most important for me. I want to have this use case to be tested much more often than other use cases. According to this bandwidth, the scheduler will choose a test from the queue to match on a free host as soon as a host is available, and will then start the installation and the testing on this host. And it can take in consideration about what host to choose, things like the host name or given features. For example, a user says, okay, my test has to run on a machine with at least 8 GB of RAM, but I don't want to say which host in specific. So he requests a feature of 8 GB of RAM, and we choose an appropriate host for it.
So one of the things I found most innovative about the system was the idea that you send the results back simply by piping it to Netcat. How did that come about, and how can you tell what test it's actually running? Is there some meta information being transmitted at the beginning of that?
We have a wrapper which executes the test and which is injected into the boot process. And this wrapper outputs a little bit of this meta information. And then the tab output of the test suite is concatenated with it. This meta information is what makes it available for possible for us to say these tests belong together. The net cutting was mainly because we wanted to keep the protocol for testers as simple as possible. This was an important part for us.
Yes, we didn't. We wanted to not require them to install local tools. Like every developer has his own preference of what language he uses or whatever. And basically, the same reason for choosing TAP as this very simple protocol, which is very language agnostic, for the same reason, we wanted to not require any tool chain. So we didn't specify use this library, use this Perl or this Python or Ruby library to write tests. And write to test anyway you want, as long as it is tapped, it's okay. And then basically out of this requirement, it was the idea to have a server process listening on a port and slope in everything between the opening of the port and the ending. And so this API is not only for tab reporting, but we have another port which which does the same for the query language. So you basically do this. You create a snippet, which is a template, and in this you can have access via a function to the query language, and you basically get a result, an array of results back, and you loop over them and you format them any way you want. Like say you make a GNU plot template, and in the middle there is some query language, and you send it to the server, and the server executes it and expands this loop for the actual values. And now what comes back from the server is this the whole GNU plot template with the result values inlined. And ideally, you can just pipe them again directly to GNU plot and get a JPEG from it or so. So this idea of using Netcat is basically everywhere. So it's also, for instance, for uploading files. You when you report the tab first, you get back an ID for the report that was just created for this stream. And with this ID, you can just do an echo ID and maybe a file name, and then a cat of the file name, and then all this together in a subshell, pipe it into a netcat, and you are done. You have just uploaded a whole file just because the first line describes what the cargo contains. And you have the ID of the report where it is assigned, and you are done. So it's all without any required toolchain on the client side. And that's what makes it so interesting, because, for instance, back to this early silicon example, if you get a new CPU out of the fab and maybe a machine, this machine is usually not completely usable as you know it from your desktop PC if you buy it at your local market. So something always goes wrong. Or maybe you don't have this machine for a long time, you just have it in a different time zone while the other developers are sleeping and you have only a few hours. And so you just go to this, you don't have time to install a toolchain, but you will quite for sure have a cat and an echo and a netcat maybe. And yeah, just run your test script, pipe it to Tapper, and at least you now have the results available and can later evaluate on them. So it doesn't matter if they are generated by the automation layer or by a developer or by a cron job. Yeah, this is the whole idea. So basically, it's always about lowering the entry barrier. Even when I gave presentations and conferences about this, I invented this the word non-aristocratic participation model. So a new buzzword. What I mean is that I don't require a central team. Usually you have a central QA team, but if you want to scale, you need a point where the developer can do as much as possible and even already create the results. So not only writing the test and then handing it over, but really develop the test by sending the results from the early experiments to the server if he wants to. So it's always about lowering this entry barrier. So the developer, we don't say use Python, use Ruby, use Perl. We don't require anything from the developer. We just trust him that he knows what he is developing on. And yeah, that's all he needs.
And I also want to clear up something from earlier. I know you said Larry Wall created the TAP protocol, which is true, but I think the thing that really got the Perl community around testing was Michael Schwartz and his efforts to beef up test simple and test more, actually, to make that all happen. And that's another thing I want to bring up, is that TAP is a continually evolving protocol. In particular, in the last few years, they've added the whole idea of subtests. Is Tapper compatible with subtests?
If you mean nested tab, then
yes.
It basically depends on the tab DOM that we generate. I have some prototypes on my disk laying around. I'm not yet sure, but technically I simply hook into the events from the tab parser, so it's no real magic. I only need to create these children connections. And once I create that, we store any data structure, and our query language can work with any data structure. So we don't really care. We don't actually use it, and the how is it called? The subtests, or the I just forgot the name. The indented tab. It always has this. This nested tab, this backwards compatible tab line. So you have this indented part with some tab, and you have kind of a summary of all these sublines, and you get this the summary OK line, which is still part of the original stream. So it would work out of the box, and as soon as I have the nested tab in the tab DOM, yeah, it works as before. We always took the latest features of TAP, so we were on the beginning on this TAP version 13 thing for the embedded YAML, and we wrote some plugins for the proof toolchain or some command line extensions to force this TAP 13 version, because otherwise it ignores the YAML. Or we basically we live on the bleeding edge of TAP.
Cool, good. And also I noticed in one of your slide decks, I see the use of template toolkit. Is that a requirement to be able to use this system? Do I need to know template toolkit? I certainly know template toolkit really well, but I saw some examples with that. Is that something that's required to use this system?
No, it's not required. It gives you additional features. For example, when Steffen mentioned the query language, you can use template toolkit to generate this query. Also, when you want to generate preconditions that define what to install on a certain machine, you can make this much more easier with template toolkit, which we call macro preconditions. You can then, for example, say, well, for all of these tests, write me a precondition that runs the test. So because a precondition has multiple lines, it's YAML, of course. It's much easier to say, okay, for well, let's say for AEM and Linux testing protocol, for example, and some other tests, whatever you have, generate me a precondition and put it into my file. And this is where template toolkit comes very handy. But it's not required. You can also write it manually without TT.
And actually, for I think for the query language.
Go ahead. Sorry.
We also have a second template language. We use also Mason, but to be in Mason, it's more Perlish. So we want to avoid this the impression that the developer had to use Perl, and that's why we chose template toolkit, because it is available in Perl, but it has this quite language agnostic homepage, and the people don't need to know about it. It looks like some arbitrary template language. We always wanted to keep this impression of language agnostic environment.
One of the things that I see in here, and forgive me if I missed this in the past discussion here, but one of the advantages I think of using this is that you can do it in a clustered way with a scheduler, right? I mean, is this something that you can do?
Well, actually, we're working on it.
Okay.
The scheduler currently needs to run on one instance, but there's no reason to not have it clustered. So we think of how to increase the abilities of the scheduler by using clusters. Because when you have lots of queues, therefore lots of use cases and many hosts, the scheduler can become quite slow and a bottleneck of the feature. But we're working on it, so let's say this.
Okay, well, that's because I'm just thinking, if I have one software project I'm working on with a couple of developers and maybe one QA guy, that's not a big deal. But if I'm a big company like Oracle or Intel or AMD or something like that, and I've got all of these different projects going on simultaneously, and they all need to be tested at various intervals, and I don't want to clobber other tests that are going on. I mean, it seems like having a cluster environment with a schedule that can be clustered, a scheduler that can be clustered, would be very advantageous. Is that something that's coming soon in a upcoming release, do you think?
So it's already there. The actual clustering is already there, to make it clear. We just think about really scaling it up for the local scheduling, but it is not limited to the amount of hosts that you currently use. And it's quite flexible there, because we have this feature of binding queues. So as Maik already explained, we have these queues of different incoming use cases, and we can say one host is, or several hosts are only working on one particular queue. And by this, you can cluster your use cases to a sub-pool of machines. And you can organize your machine pool into the use cases. And if you have thousands of them, and hundreds of use cases, then scheduling actually becomes a bit slow. But yeah, if the runtime is long enough, it doesn't really hurt. So the clustering itself is already there. We just work on the scalability, that we are really able to schedule thousands of hosts and thousands of queues, and not just hundreds of queues like we did.
Yeah. What if I was a small developer? Are there public systems available? And I guess this kind of gets into the question of what other alternatives are there out there to Tapper? But I'm just thinking, like, what if I'm a small-time developer and I want to have this type of functionality, but I don't really need to set up a whole, thousands of hosts like we were just talking about, right? I mean, is there a public infrastructure available for me to go? I almost said tap into Tapper. Be able to use this software just as an individual developer.
So if a developer is interested, the first thing I can suggest is go to tappertesting.org/helloworld. It will redirect you to 2 example pages on GitHub. And there it's described how you set up your own little Tapper in your home directory with a .tapper subdirectory. And it comes with some out-of-the-box working. If you follow the wiki page, it demonstrates how to participate by writing a test, sending it, and start the queries on it, and also run your own little automation. And it's based on small scripts that are wrapping the test. And yeah, you can just start from these examples and go from there. There's no usable hosted instance yet. Maybe if you just want to see the web interface, you can go to my pet project, which is performance.net/Tapper. So performance is a benchmarking of Perl 5 interpreter, and I use Tapper there. And on /Tapper, performance.net/Tapper, you can just click around in the results. It doesn't use all the features. It doesn't use test plans and continuous integration test runs, but just some cron job automation. But anyway, to give you a first impression how the web interface looks like. So the Hello World and the performance.net is maybe a first step to get an impression. Yeah, no, I think that would be good because I can see someone maybe that has 1 or 2 developers, or I'm just thinking, is there any opportunity here for someone that wants to offer QA services, to use Tapper as a backend for offering, third-party QA services? It seems like it would be a good opportunity there for somebody to do that. The other question I had was, what kind of dependencies are there to this? I mean, you mentioned that there are scripts on the wiki to help get you started. Like, are there different scripts or different recipes, so to speak? Like, if I want to do QA testing in a virtualized environment, does it walk me through how to set up Xen or KVM in such a way that that Tapper will work with those?
Sorry, go ahead.
It can become tricky. So this virtualization testing is basically the most extreme use case that we started with. And if you start with this, it is tricky to set this up because the environment that we used depended on have this machine booting or knowing where to boot from with a DHCP, the TFTP server, and so on. So I would start with a simple use case. So with all the interested parties that we already had in the past, we started discussing the use case in our org channel. So it's on Freenode #Tapper, and basically start with some simple test, then expand from there. Maybe they are using a dedicated device where they want to run it on like an ARM device. Then we just find out how we can boot this device or how we can inject. Not all people needed to set up the machine from scratch. Quite often they have their own machines already there, or maybe they have their already virtualized machines with say 30 guests on it with 30 different environments prepared, and they only want to replace the current kernel. So this is most of the time we need to listen what the use case is of an interested guy and come up with the ideas how we would approach this. So the actual, you can, if you want, our project, it's on GitHub Tupper deployment. You can see how we bootstrap a whole central server, which does the whole complex scenario that we did in the OSRC and AMD. So it provides everything with the TFTP server and whatever. It builds change routes for booting from network. It builds other change routes and makes images from them to install on the machines and so on. So if you go for the complex world, have a look at Tupper deployment, but it's probably overkill. It's better to start with this Hello World example.
Right. But at least you have that other one. I mean, I think that's great that you can basically start at bare metal and build it up, at least within one scenario. What about other? So this is always virtual, right? I mean, this is not something that you would typically run on bare metal.
Well, we do. Okay, you can run it on bare metal if you're just kernel testing. But we started with virtualization because this was an important use case, or the most important use case for us. Because it's more easy to test a simple kernel without virtualization, but with virtualization it was too hard to have it manually, and therefore we started the project in the first place.
Yeah. What about higher end virtualization software like VirtualBox? Is there a way to plug into that if I just wanted to do this on my desktop without going to KVM or Xen?
It's quite possible. We just polished it for Xen and KVM, but the actual automation is just reporting back some events, like you call some URL to the scheduler state engine. You just report back that you just finished the installation, you just start a test or so, and with this we can adapt to any other environment. We are regularly asked for, let's say, VMware or so. I didn't have a look on these particular systems, but it's just generic. It's not bound to Xen or KVM. It was just the use cases that we had in the OSRC in AMD.
Xen is kind of a first-class citizen for us. When you define a virtualization test, which means any test that runs in a virtualization environment, the Tupper cares for starting the virtualization guests. And when it's a Xen virtualization that you're using, it knows to use XM or XL, whichever is available. Then again, when you use KVM, you already need to use a start script, and you could also use such a start script for VirtualBox or whatever you use, and have the Xen the virtualization guest set up by the script. So it's already there.
So I happen to notice that both of you guys list that you're currently working at Amazon Web Services. Actually, I don't know if that means you're a user of the AWS or whether you're actually employed by Amazon. If you're employed by Amazon and you can talk about it, can you tell me how Perl is being used with Amazon Web Services?
I can't really talk about this.
Okay. Sorry.
But it's okay. We do Tupper, that's for sure. We continued this. And besides that, maybe it helps to know that we hire in this area. So everything else you need to Google by yourself and make your own picture. Sorry.
I can guess from that. Actually, I've done a little bit of consulting for Amazon, so yes, I do actually know that the Perl is still heavily used in all divisions at some point or another. So, but yeah, no, it's good to see that Perl is remaining alive. I mean, a lot of people keep saying, "Well, Perl's dead now. Perl's dead," but you know, we're getting a new full release of Perl every year and a new quarterly release every 3 months. And more people are using Perl today than ever, but people keep saying Perl's dead. I really love that you guys are embracing this and doing that well. We're almost out of time. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you want to make sure that our audience is aware of about Tapper before we have to go?
Yeah, maybe, as you just said, Perl, we could mention that Tapper is one example of these more modern Perl projects from the beginning. We started with an early Moose for the object layer. We started with DBIX class for the object relational mapper, and we started with Catalyst for the web user interface. We use Modulicious for all these REST APIs, and so we are not always bleeding edge, but we tried quite hard to make it interesting to make it an interesting modern Perl project, and so it's definitely alive. So the language is alive and CPAN is alive. We use thousands of dependencies, and we are not scared by dependencies. We love them. And yeah, what else could we say?
There's already one part which even benefits from having a 5.16 installed. We have a notification framework which tells you when your test is finished, and also you can have it inform you on certain conditions like, okay, you were testing a Xen 4.3 on Red Hat, and it was successful all the 5 last times, and now it's no longer successful. And defining such a condition that 5 tests were successful on Xen Red Hat, and now it's no longer successful, is done with a feature which only works fine in 5.16.
You know, I always hear that. I hear the new version numbers. They keep going up and up and up. You know, I remember when I was thinking, like, when the Perl 6 was announced about a decade ago, and they were talking about, I think 5.8 was the current release at that point. And I kept thinking, well, I guess that means 5.10 is going to be the last Perl 5. But I think we're going to go on forever, aren't we?
We are.
Yeah, definitely. And it's so easy, really. If since the dawn of Perl Brew and CPAN miners and all these little modern tools, it's so much fun, and it's just amazing. It's so easy. Our deployment basically depends on these little tools. We don't depend on the distributions Perl. We just make our own Perl with Perl Brew and so on. And
with Perl Brew and sorry, go ahead.
And we basically also adapted or stole a lot of ideas from the CPAN testers project. So big kudos to CPAN testers. They are a huge infrastructure or sub-community using TAP and having interesting tool chains that we stole. So yeah, it's all amazing there. And we basically adapted all these this culture available there and adapted it and brought it into operating system testing and combined this. So
that's interesting. So I actually haven't asked about this. What's the community like? Do you have a lot of outside committers? Actually, well, since you're outside now, you're no longer at AMD. What's the community like? You're getting a lot of different contributions from different people?
Not yet. We have some interested parties, and occasionally someone tries to adapt his use case, and they come into our IRC channel. But currently, we use the community indirectly without them knowing it, because we just choose the latest versions from CPAN and so on, and we grow with Moose and we grow with the DBIX class and so on, but not direct developers on Tapper. We could use them, but yeah, it mostly depends on finding someone in the Perl community who does some QA project, which I think Tapper is the right thing for. So whenever, because if a Perl guy comes along, there's most probably already TAP in his world, and we have all the missing pieces around this, have a TAP database and so on. And so if you start with a Perl use case, some testing, some benchmarking, talk to us, and we take care of it, and we need just someone asking the question, and what next? What next? And we just answer it, and then we help him along the way.
So what's your what's at the top of your to-do list in terms of the roadmap for this thing?
The easiness. I think what we did already in November, December, when I had some spare cycles, was making it easy to install it on your own machine. Then it's scaling up. So, yeah, and basically, we live along the use cases. Most often, we fulfill the use cases in our corporate lives. So that's why it's the virtualization and so on. Then we polished it for pet projects like me with this benchmarking. And I think the next thing I try to do is polish it for to go into the typical Perl use cases, like replace the proof with, say, a tapper proof and get a tapper combined with your typical workflow of a typical Perl developer, like basically make a history of your projects and so. I think this is what's important for the community. I can't tell you the new corporate use cases, but let's just think big and make up whatever you think.
Good enough advice. Well, I got two standard questions I ask all my guests, and I think I know the answer to at least one of the two questions here. So we'll start with Steffen first. Favorite scripting language?
Definitely Brain. Oh, no, did I say Brain? It's Perl.
Can't say that on the air. Okay. But what is it? Yes.
So it's Perl.
Okay, great. And your favorite text editor?
Emacs, of course. Is there another text editor?
Yes. Yeah, right. Because my text editor can emulate anybody else's text editors. That's just fine. Great. Well, you answered two questions, two answers in my column. I like that. Okay, good. I got some pluses on that. Very nice. So we'll go back to Maik. Maik, what is your favorite scripting language?
For using Perl 5, but coolest language is Perl 6.
Couldn't have paid somebody to answer that better. Okay, and your favorite text editor?
GNU Emacs.
Awesome. Okay, this is definitely a win in both columns for me today. I really appreciate that. A lot for coming on the air here and talking about Tapper. I think this is interesting. It's a fascinating project. I actually have a recommendation for my previous client to go check this out. I think it'll be really handy for them. Thanks for coming on and talking about Tapper.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Yeah. Bye.
Very good. There are disembodied voices. That was Steffen and Maik talking about Tapper. What do you think, Aaron?
Well, it's pretty interesting. I mean, this is an aspect that I don't think people consider a lot in terms of software development. If we talk about software development, people think hands-on coding. You know, I'm just writing the code and I throw it over the fence and hopefully it works, right? But there's a whole other side to software development, which is QA testing. And, there's a specific problem set there that needs to be solved. And how do you do repeatable tests? How do you automate tests? How do you make sure? I thought the example he gave at the end, that Maik gave at the end, was really interesting. You know, what happens when this runs 5 times and then fails? You need to get that information back. Well, what caused it to fail on that 6th run? Was it just, that it doesn't like the number 6, or, what was it about that run that caused it to fail? So I think that this is I won't say it's interesting to everyone, but it's a necessary evil in the software development world. And it's nice that there are people out there trying to make it a little easier for those that have to go work on this.
And not to, I don't think you can overstate the importance of tests. One of the things that I'm doing a lot with my clients is I'm changing their code, but I don't necessarily understand all of their logic necessarily. I'm just trying to make optimizations. Actually, it's funny. I've been, for the last few months, when I've been checking into the new client I have here, I've been saying that on my check-in, I'm saying I'm making things go faster. Because what I'm doing consistently is optimizing things to make sure that they can deliver, 600 million hits a day off these 50 machines they're performing. But it's really difficult for me is changing stuff, but not recognizing what I might be breaking, because I'm staring at part of the code, trying to figure out how to make it go better or faster or whatever, but I don't necessarily know all the ins and outs that it has. So I don't know how it's being used in the code. In the absence of good test suites, I can't do my work as a new developer. And this is, people don't get this, that you have to invest. Managers have to let developers invest the time it takes to write test suites, because otherwise code never stays with one person. It goes on to the next person, the next person, the next person. Without a good test suite, the next person that takes over your code will not know whether they're breaking something where you made an assumption about some sort of input or output, but which would only be embodied in the test.
Right.
And I think that you know, when I hear managers say, "Oh no, we just want to get the code out. We want to get the code done. Don't worry about testing right now. We'll just sort of test it live or whatever. we'll do it live. We'll do it live. We'll do it in production, right?" But that is such a wrong attitude to have, especially in modern code development. So I really like that Tapper seems to make this like end-to-end easier, right? In terms of firing up a VM, making your code run under any sort of language as long as it outputs tap at some point. And I really like that netcat thing. Just oh yeah, we don't need a special client. We're just going to pipe it to netcat. I don't know, did we ever describe what netcat is? Probably not. But basically it's a little tool that allows you to connect to a port, a TCP port, and take standard in and just send it there. So it's like the most trivial client you can use. I use it sometimes to test like whether web server's up or not, that sort of thing. But it's really handy to use. And then have this nice reporting framework with this query language, which I forgot to get into. Oh, well, they're gone. Too bad. This query language, which seems really cool, too. So you could say, did it have any tests failed? And what about the performance benchmarks in a particular section? That sort of thing. Really handy stuff. So I really like this. I think this is a great project. I'm glad we got a chance to talk to them. And, of course, I'm all excited because it's Perl. And they said the right answers for both Perl and Emacs. So I'm really happy about that, too. So anything else, Aaron, before we go on to the upcoming guests?
No, let's hit it.
Let's hit it, man. Let's see. Where's my list? Here we go. So we got so upcoming guests. In terms of upcoming guests, I am not here for the next 4 weeks. I am going to be in South America, which I'll describe in a few moments. But y'all, my rotating panel co-hosts, are taking over for me while I'm gone. So we'll still have a series of shows. Next week, in fact, we're coming up with Media Goblin, which is a media publishing platform that anybody can run to make your own Flickr, YouTube, etc. We got Zotonic, which is an Erlang-based web framework and content management system. We've got Cake PHP, a very popular PHP-based framework for web. We've got the Dart language. I'll be back for that. Oh, sorry, Poodle. Forgot Poodle. Don't forget Poodle. That's a web-based translation framework. So we had one of those on a while back where basically you and put up your text strings for your program and let people kind of plug in what it means to say that same thing in Spanish or French or whatever you want. It's kind of cool that way. We also have the Dart language, which is a language that Google is developing that is backward compatible with JavaScript, and that it can be compiled down to JavaScript, but it's a modern language in the sense that it has actual real structures and real classes and instances and things like that. We've got Pinto, which is another Perl project. It's a localized CPAN. So you can have an instance of CPAN for your business that might be different from the original CPAN, and having your local modules there and allow you to install things like that. That's, in fact, our friend Jeffrey Thalhorner, who was on talking about Perl Critic about a year and a half ago. You can see all these and more. We're going to start opening up Q2 probably in a couple weeks. Q1 is full already. We've got, you can see the names there. Twit.tv/floss. There is a link to my big spreadsheet, which talks about everything coming up. You can also follow us on Floss with Google+. I try to post there whenever I bring on a new guest or when I'm about to announce a show that's coming up. You can also follow us on Floss Weekly on either Twitter or Identica, all one word. We do have a live chat room. Didn't take any questions from it this time, but live.twit.tv at 8:30 a.m. Pacific time on Wednesdays is our normal taping time. So if you want to watch us behind the scenes, see what kind of flubs and mistakes we make and how many times we have to reconnect to me because the hotel Wi-Fi connection is bad, then you can see that online. You can see it, watch it, and watch us do it live. You can follow me on Merlin, M-E-R-L-Y-N, on Twitter. You can also follow me as Randal L. Schwartz on Google+. And if you followed me on either of those, you would know that, in fact, I am now down 40 pounds in 5 months. My blood pressure is phenomenal. My lipids are phenomenal. I'm now 175. I'm aiming for about another maybe 10 pounds loss, something like that. I'm just going to kind of let it settle down and see where I actually end up because I'm having a great time doing that. And I'm doing low-carb, high-fat, also known as a ketogenic diet. It's the same thing that Steve Gibson talked about in his Climbing Sugar Hill Twit special, so you can also Google for that. And like I said a moment ago, I am going to be gone for the next 4 weeks. I am, at this time next week, I am going to be in Ecuador, Quito, Ecuador, and I'm going to be taking a picture probably about right now. No, actually about 2 hours from now, if we're looking at exactly a week from now. I'm going to be straddling the equator. So I'm going to take a picture of myself with my right foot in northern hemisphere and my left foot in the southern hemisphere. And then the next day, I fly on a small plane out to a small ship, and I'm going to go tour the Galapagos Islands. It's going to be awesome. But no internet for 5 freaking days. I don't know how I'm going to be off-grid for 5 days, but no frickin' internet for 5 days. Then I'm going on a 12-day cruise around the Horn. So I'm going to leave from Valparaiso, Chile, and going all the way down around the southern tip of South America, ending up in Buenos Aires, fly back just in time to do the next show. So that's my schedule for the next 4 weeks, and y'all are like taking over for me. Thank you very much for that, guys. And Aaron, anything going on for you?
Yeah, so since you're down to your target goal, I just thought I'd bring this congratulatory set of donuts for you.
No donuts.
Too
no
bad
donuts.
You're not here to enjoy it, Randall. They smell delicious.
Not anymore. They smell like cardboard to me.
No, I brought that for the folks here at the Brick House, so I can't eat them. I can't eat them either because I'm also doing low carb, high fat, and I'm down 10 pounds, man.
Yay!
So since the beginning of January, so it should start to not quite go off quite as fast as that now for the next few months. So I'm expecting that. But anyway, if you want to find out more about my low carb, high fat diet or anything I'm working on, you can go to @AaronNewcomb on any of the social networks that you enjoy, be it Facebook, Twitter, or my favorite, Google+. If you want to talk to me about something that's going on, Google+ is the best way to do it. We can start a hangout, we can chat, we can do all sorts of stuff, which is a lot more difficult to do on the other social networks. So you can go to thesourceshow.org, which is no longer being updated, quite frankly. But you can go there and check out my old podcast that I used to do called The Source. I'm working on some other things I can't talk about right now, but I'll just give you a teaser to watch this space. Not this space, but the space at Google+. Watch that space for something that may be coming up or may not be coming up. We'll see. Hopefully it's coming up soon. That's all I can say. Other than that, yeah, I'm working on lots of cool stuff. Right now I'm trying to learn some Python. I'm rewriting my Raspberry Pi old-time radio in Python and using a different backend for the media stuff. So I'll be chatting about that online and probably writing up a blog post soon describing how I put that all together if you've been following that saga. So that's about it.
Cool. And thank you once again for driving all the way from your home, I think it's Oakland somewhere, all the way up to Petaluma to be in the studio.
Yeah, it's not Oakland, but it is on the East Bay area, so it's a little bit of a drive. And I was here last night doing All About Android, so if you missed All About Android last night, you want to tune in, I was on All About Android. We talk about Linux-y related stuff. So we talked about Wine, we talked about XBMC, which I'm really excited about right now with their new release of Frodo. They added all sorts of stuff into there. It's really cool. So if you want to learn more about that, check out All About Android, which is up online right now. So as soon as we're done with this, go check it out.
Cool. And like I said, I will not be here for 4 weeks. I'm going to be in South America enjoying myself on the next Insight Cruises cruise, along with a pre-cruise trip to the Galapagos, doing an eco tour. I'll have plenty of pictures and plenty of things to say once I get back online again. 5 days not online. I cannot. I think it's the longest since like 1995 that I've been offline. So it's going to be really. Once I found out about that, I thought, well, every ship has Wi-Fi now, but no, they said no, it doesn't. There's no Wi-Fi on this little tiny ship. I went, uh-oh. Anyway, but I'll be there. It'll be good. So I'll see you guys in 4 weeks, and my rotating panel of co-hosts will take over for me while I'm gone. So we'll see you again next time on FLOSS Weekly.